All right, welcome everybody. Let's give everybody at least a minute or two to get settled. Grab your cocktail, your beer, your wine, your seltzer water, whatever you want. We're about to. It's the scary part, right? We got to pay the bills now. The fun's over, so everybody gets settled. It's a nice part about our new Zoom world here. We can be in our the comforts of home. But bear with us 1 to 2 minutes, and then we will dial in. I'll make sure I'm on silent here. And
what's up, everybody? I'm not going to be on screen much. Just popping on and say hello. I will be in the background. Fire away in the Q&A box. Use the Q&A box. We're going to record this, and the recordings happen in the Q&A. So feel free, fire away. You want to be anonymous? Feel free. Use your name. Anything specific. If it's kind of a general question, I'll stop Matt and we'll throw it to the group. But welcome. I hope you guys get a ton out of this. Again, just I know a couple of you reached out. This is going to be recorded. You will get an email with it tomorrow. So if you got to cut out or whatever the case may be, no worries. And Matt will talk this, but if anyone after this, you're not sure something, still want to go over something, strategy, whatever, feel free, right? Book a time to chat, and we'll get everything squared away. Obviously answer any and all remaining questions, but this is honestly unbelievably comprehensive program tonight. You're all going to get a lot out of it. But anything else further, feel free to reach out to myself or Matt or whoever you were working with through the year, and we'll kind of put a bow on it and make sure you're ready to go for August. With that, I'm going to go to the background and all right, enjoy.
so that was just to piggyback on the other Matt here. You guys are stuck with the two Matts tonight. Matt Carpenter, myself up in Salem, Mass. Matt Mulhern down there in Jersey City, New Jersey. I'm going to be emceeing us for most of the night. Again, I'm going to do some housekeeping stuff right now. Then I'll shut my camera off and actually go through the slides, and I'll be the talk track. Like Matt said, he's going to be in the background on the Q&A. Again, please put the questions in the Q&A because they're all transcribed. It'll be part of the recording as opposed to the chat. In this way, everybody can benefit from those. And you can remain anonymous too. So if you have a personal question, just choose the option to be anonymous. We'll get that answered for you. Combined here, we've been doing this for, 25 years, thereabouts. So we're pretty well versed here. This is the last kind of, we break this process into 4 kind of major categories, 4 pillars, as we call them. This is the last one. It's an important one now, right? Now we all know where we're going to school. We know exactly how much it's going to cost, at least year one, and we can project that out over 4 years. And to an extent, probably for all the kids, if we have more kids coming behind our class of 2021 student. But what is the best way to pay the bill? Right. And this is something we're pretty proud of in terms of our deliverables here. And this is something I think and I hope a lot of the reason people choose to work with us is because, yes, we want to do everything we can to save some money, save some time, save some stress on the front end of this process. But on the back end, what's the right way to pay for this? And as some of you know, just like every year, it's just the reality of the world we live in. Percentage of you have to borrow every dollar of this in order to make it happen, right? That's just the reality that we're dealing with here. And there's no silver bullet, right? There's no easy way to cut checks for 50, 60, 70, 80, 30 grand a year, whatever it happens to be, right? And we're all somewhere on that scale. But what we're trying to provide at a minimum is some peace of mind here. Right, we feel confident we can show you the most cost-effective way to do this, but also the right way to do it for your family. And we're going to go through this, and I'll say it more than once tonight because it's true. There is no universal solution, right? It's not everybody should use the federal program or everybody should use home equity, whatever it happens to be. But we've kind of put this system together that's going to allow you to arrive at what's the right decision for your family. Right. And I think there's a lot to be said for knowing that your family is doing it the way that you should be doing it based on what you have to work with. And that's, again, what we're pretty good at, helping you identify what's the right solution for you and then helping you implement that and at least knowing that, okay, we're doing this the right way. We're not just taking a random guess. There's a, there's a method to the madness here. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight, right? From an overview standpoint, we're going to talk about number one, if we have any savings, if we have any cash flow capabilities, and we're going to also talk about some strategies, even if we're one of those families that say we don't have cash flow capabilities, maybe we can help you there. But when do we use what, right? If we have any resources, when should we spend what? Does it make sense to hold on? Should we exhaust stuff up front? Do we try to spread it out over 4 years? And then for those of us that have to borrow, how do we do that? How do we get the best rates? How do we get the best terms? How do we actually execute and implement those? That's what we're here to talk about tonight, right? So you're going to leave here with really your PhD in how to execute this part of the process. And then, of course, if and when there's follow-up questions, you have us to lean on an individual basis. So, we're kind of excited to deliver on this part of the process, because in a lot of ways, it's maybe the least sexy one, right? Who cares? You pay the bill, you borrow, whatever, but it's really important. And, the more you understand about this, the more success you're going to have. So, again, that's what we're here to talk about tonight. And, the quick, from kind of a mindset standpoint, I know this is a really scary thing. These bills are getting real. Some of them are freaking huge, but it's for a good reason. You guys did it, right? I would argue, again, this class 2021 was my 16th year guiding families through this process. And maybe, you all had the most challenging year, right? And so, but everybody did it. Your kids are going off to college, right? And even if it's not the top choice, even if it's more than you want to be, they're going off to college, and we're going to make this happen. We're going to we are going to find, even if we have to borrow every penny, the least of the evils here. So enough of the preamble. Let's get to it. Again, questions in the Q&A. I'm going to shut my camera off. Any follow-up questions, you're going to have the ability to meet with us one-on-one, as much as you need to make sure that everybody's in as good a shape as they possibly can be. Let me make sure, and Vern, if you can just confirm, am I sharing my screen here?
Yeah,
All right,
you're
beautiful.
good. Fire away.
So let's dig in, right? I think this is a pretty good title here. How the hell are we going to pay for this, right? A lot of you know what I'm talking about here. Probably have that mindset today. But let's talk timeline, okay? So just like you've heard us say ad nauseum, especially if you've been with us for multiple years, every school's different, right? And this is no different. So there is no universal date in which bills are due, which bills are issued. But generally speaking, most colleges will issue their bill. So you'll get your bill in and around mid-July, and it's due usually about a month later. So in and around mid-August. Okay. And then again, it's later in the fall, going into late winter, going into early winter, that you're going to get your spring semester bills. So with very few exceptions, you're going to get 2 bills over the course of the year, one for fall semester, one for spring semester. And it certainly feels like it's such a condensed timeline. In a lot of ways it is, right? When we think about borrowing, a lot of money, maybe most of us think about a home equity loan or doing a refi, things like this, where it takes 60, 90, maybe more days, 2 to 3 months. And a lot of people get nervous this time of year. They say, we haven't even got a bill yet. We know we're going to have to borrow the vast majority. Don't we have to get it moving? But this is the natural timeline. Most educational loans, your standard educational loans, take 1 to 3 days to process. So even though it doesn't feel natural, this is the natural timeline. Okay. And this is not a hard and fast deadline, but what we recommend is that families try to have their borrowing plan in place by mid-July. So about a month from now, we want to know, how are we going to borrow, who are we going to borrow from? And that gives us plenty of time before that first fall semester bill is due again for most schools. Now, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the fact that many colleges, not all of them, but many colleges have a monthly payment plan. So we don't have to necessarily do 2 lump sum payments. Oftentimes we can spread these out over the course of the year, and that usually means 10 months, okay? A lot of these payment plans start in June. Some of them have started already, not all of them, certainly. Again, it varies from one institution to the next, but these are some of our kind of standard dates as we talk about timelines. Now, if we've missed the beginning of a payment plan for a school, it doesn't matter, right? Most schools will allow us to start before their kickoff date, but sometimes we'll owe the previous month's payments if we started earlier, right? So there's a lot of schools that their timelines are borderline hilarious. I'll pick on Boston College for a second. Their payment plan starts in May, something like that, a couple of months before families even get a bill, right? So how am I supposed to know what my payment plan is before I've even seen a bill? That's a tricky one, right? So, and they're not alone there. I'm picking on Boston College a little bit, but they're not alone. But again, even if you've missed the beginning of those payment plans, you haven't missed the boat. Okay. So, something we'll say, all the time is, well, what's the best way to borrow? Well, it's to not borrow. It's to avoid it altogether, right? And we all wish we could be that lucky. Obviously, that's not the case, but it always makes sense to start talking about ways that we can potentially reduce borrowing, or oftentimes we'll talk about ways to delay borrowing, because that usually makes sense, especially when it comes to this particular investment that is paying for college. And there's also a method to the madness in terms of, if we do have resources, when should we use what? Okay, so that's something that I want to walk through right now. Now again, no recommendations we're making are black and white and firm. And again, there's usually nuance in most situations. So let me just kind of say that as a disclaimer, that most of the recommendations we're making here are in general terms, right? So the first one here is, we usually want to use any money in the students' names first, right? So if you remember way back when you first started hearing from us during kind of the initial education process, we talk about the fact that most colleges look at any money in the student's name first and with the most emphasis, right? In other words, it makes us eligible for less financial aid if there's money in the student's name. So, within that premise, it makes sense to take any money in their name first, right? So again, generally speaking, that's the first place that we're going to draw from. And then it's our money that is earmarked specifically for college, right? So specifically our college savings plans. So generally speaking, those are 529s, right? Or ESA accounts, U funds we have here in Massachusetts, but your standard kind of college savings plans, because in most cases, if you don't use those for college, you get some type of penalty, right? So we want to make sure we don't end up in a situation where we took money from other places. We still have money in our college savings plans plan after graduation, and then we get a penalty because we use it for something else, right? So first it's the money in a student's name, and then it's the money in the college savings plan, right? So oftentimes, again, another way of looking at this more technical terms is whether it's money in the student savings account or checking account, or then your traditional, what are called custodial accounts, right? So these investment vehicles that are technically in the students' names, UGMA or UTMA, that's what we want to exhaust first, right? And then it's down to our traditional college savings plans. And then the next place that we look is our funds that are earmarked for college. So maybe it's not in a 529, but this is a savings account that you've set aside, or this is a mutual fund that, again, in your family's plan is earmarked for college. That's what comes next. Okay. Something that is worth considering here, and we were more concerned with this even a year ago. Now, some of these new legislation changes will kind of change the recommendations here, but money in the grandparents' name, okay? So a percentage of there are savings that are earmarked for your kids' college costs, but they're technically held in grandparents' or aunts' or family friends' names, right? And that's awesome. That's a great thing, and what a blessing. But you want to probably talk to us if that's the case here, because the current rules, if you take money from a grandparent, specifically that's in a 529, and you use that money to pay a college bill in freshman or sophomore year of college, it could, I'm not saying definitely, but it could negatively impact your eligibility for aid in subsequent years. So generally speaking, if we're a family that's eligible for need-based financial aid, we want to hold on to grandparent contributions or aunt contributions until junior and senior year of college. Okay, now that's only a smaller percentage of you, so I don't want to belabor that point. But if you're a family that fits into that category, you might want to throw any questions that are not crystal clear into the Q&A, or talk to us, after the fact here. Now, it looks as if that legislation and those rules are going to change. So moving forward, after next year, grandparent contributions, regardless of when they're made, will not hurt your eligibility for financial aid. But until that becomes official, it's something that at the very least we want to be cognizant of, right? The next thing that we're looking at is any private scholarships. So a lot of you are fortunate enough to get some money locally through the Rotary Club or through the AMVETS, things like this. We want to make sure that we utilize private scholarships, certainly. And then students that have a summer job, right? If they have some income that they're generating themselves, that's the next place we want to look. Tax credits is something that we're going to talk about in a couple of slides here. Is that some of you, and a decent percentage of you, are going to be eligible for tax credits that you have not received previously because of the fact that you have a student in college. And generally how we coach this is, hey, you're going to get a $2,500 tax credit, and that's something you haven't received before. As opposed to just using that for a vacation, let's go ahead and just earmark that, put that towards next semester's college costs in order to reduce the amount that we have to borrow, reduce our down payment here, right? And then finally, we're talking about going into the loan part of the process, specifically the federal government student loans that each of your kids are eligible for here, right? So these are all the things we want to exhaust first before we talk about borrowing. And this is really the order of operations of when and how we should be liquidating these accounts. Okay. And again, as I alluded to, most colleges offer a payment plan. So again, if you have to pay $40,000 over the course of a year, many colleges will allow us to break that into 10 payments of $4,000. The other thing to keep in mind here is that you don't have to, let's say, for example, your family's bottom line out of pocket is $40,000, but there's no way you could do that via $4,000 a month over 10 months. You don't have to. You could say we can do a payment plan of $2,000 a month, okay, over 10 months. So we could do $20,000, and then we'd have to borrow the rest lump sum. You can do that. So an important thing to keep in mind here, and something that we'll talk about throughout, is the fact that you can chop this up any number of ways. And oftentimes that's what makes sense, right? We're going to, put some money down cash. We're going to put some on a payment plan. We're going to do some via student loan, and then the parent loan is going to make up the difference of that, right? That's certainly common, and there's often times that strategically something like that makes sense. And again, this is going to come to light here as we're talking through this in the next hour here, right? Now, the payment plans usually do not have interest so long as we keep those same payments on time each month. There's usually some enrollment fee, right? Between $60 and $75 period is usually the average amount in order to set these up. Important to keep in mind, again, you'll hear me say it many times over, as it's always been, every college is different, right? Not every college has a payment plan. They all start at different times. They all have different fees. Not all of them are 10 months, right? Some of these big state schools say they have a payment plan, but it's 3 payments instead of 2, basically, right? So that's not always that helpful for many families. So those are a couple of ways that we can reduce, again, kind of our down payment and how much we actually have to borrow. Cash is king here, right? Cash is king. And some of the stuff that I'm going to share in these next couple slides are not necessarily earth shattering, but I like to start with this premise. If we can free up $100 a month in cash flow and put that towards college, that is $5,000 less than you as a parent and or the student has to borrow over the course of the student's college career, right? So another, and where that comes from is, let's say your student's going to college over the course of 4 years, that's 48 months, right? If we can do $100 a month out of cash flow over that time period, it's $4,800. We're rounding up to 5,000 for a dramatic effect here. But I think it's important to, just really emphasize every $100 we do from a cash flow standpoint reduces the amount we have to borrow by $5,000, and again, plus interest, right? So that's kind of where I like to start when we talk about the cash flow standpoint. And we're going to get into some strategies in just a second here as it pertains to cash flow. Before we do, I wanted to elaborate on kind of what we talked about in that first slide with these tax credits. Now, the reason that we bring this to your attention is not every, and this is just based on our experience, not every CPA or accountant that we've had experience with is really aware of how the American Opportunity Tax Credit works. So some families end up missing out on this $2,500 a year per child tax credit because it just kind of slipped through the cracks here. So if you do your own taxes, you need to be hyper aware of this. If you do not, you need to make sure that your accountant is aware that you have a student in college this year and moving forward for the next 4 years, and to make sure it's top of mind that you take full advantage of this tax credit.
All right, real quick, divorce situations. Am I right in saying whoever claims the child is the one that gets the American Opportunity Tax Credit?
That's right. Yeah. So it has to be the one that claims the child that gets the tax credit.
Yeah. So just FYI on that, as it didn't matter for financial aid if you fall into that boat, but it will matter for that $2,500. So just FYI on that if you fall into head of household or divorced or separated.
It's a good point because and just to elaborate on that a little bit further, divorced or separated families, as those of you listening probably remembers, as we were guiding you through this, we can use whomever we want as the custodial parent as it pertains to who claims the student as an exemption on their tax returns, right? It doesn't matter. Either parent can still be the quote unquote custodial parent on the financial aid applications, but it does matter in terms of this tax credit. The only parent that can take advantage of this if they fall within the income thresholds, which are actually less for two household families. Okay, they are less than these amounts. Only that parent can take advantage of this tax credit. Okay. Now here's, if you're a family that has less than $160,000 AGI, this is something you really need to pay attention to, because this is where we see most people, even again, accountants that are aware of this tax credit, lose out on this $2,500 a year. Okay. Let me use a hypothetical to talk you through this. Let's say that you're a family whose total college bill is $30,000. Okay. And you have $50,000 in your 529, right? Or you have $50,000. Yeah. $50,000 in your 529. Okay. Now, most families under that premise would say, okay, great. We got the bill for $30,000 in year one. I'm going to take the entire $30,000 out of my 529, boom, pay it off, and I'm done. If we do it that way, and our income is less than $160,000, we would lose out on this $2,500 tax credit. It's this weird little IRS loophole type of thing where they say that at least $4,000 needs to come from any other resource aside from the 529 if we want to get this tax credit. Okay, so let me kind of spell that out for you. In that hypothetical, and we'll help each of you with this, of course. You're a family that has this $30,000 tap. You have $50,000 in the 529. What we are demanding that you do is only use $26,000 from the 529, pay that additional $4,000 from any other resource in order to qualify for that tax credit. So again, it's a funky and confusing little thing, but if you don't do it that way, you lose out on $2,500 a year. We're talking 10 grand, right? Now, there are
just real quick, yeah, it's 4,000 for the year, right? That's not per semester, it's 4,000.
That's right, $4,000 for the year, correct.
Yep.
There are some cases in which a family that has a adjusted gross income over $180,000 may be able to take advantage of this tax credit. And that usually happens through the student. Now, the easiest way to do it is if the student, if the family has a business, right? So it's a business owner, a self-employed family, and they put their students on payroll, and they do not claim them as an exemption, which you're not getting any breaks now anyways. So it's not like that's hurting you tax-wise. They file independently. Now they can take advantage of this tax credit if you set it up that way. Okay, so there are some complexities here, so I do not want to belabor it, but we have a lot of resources and a lot of professionals, both on our team and as kind of an extension of our team, that can help your family figure out, are there ways that we can get creative to take advantage of this tax credit, even if our AGI is over 180,000, right? So, and I'm going to, I know enough about this to be dangerous, but I leave that up to the financial planners on our team and the CPAs on our team that can set this up in their sleep. And again, for those of you that are somewhere in this category, I would put you in touch specifically with them. And again, we can facilitate that after the presentation here as part of the follow-up. Okay. So this is, in some ways, we kind of look at this like one of your major, for all of us, right? Or certainly all of us that have kids, one of the major benchmarks in our financial life. This is one of them. Right. It's maybe first it's saving up to purchase a home. And then it's, the next huge one might be sending your kids to college and eventually retiring here. Now is as good a time as any to, hit the reset button. Right. And I'll talk about, as we leave here tonight, some of you, in addition to, we're going to do a great job showing you the best way to pay this bill and the best way to borrow. But some of you are going to have questions that are a little bit more comprehensible. How do I thread the needle between sending my kids to college and being able to retire on time, right? And, you're going to have questions kind of beyond this conversation here, which, again, and plenty of you are working with John and Jim and Josh currently, they can help you have those more comprehensive conversations. And again, we'll follow up after the fact for families that do have more in-depth conversations. But now is a great time to just, again, kind of reset. Like, let's take a look at everything in our financial life right now to make sure we're optimal, right? We are maximizing optimization everywhere here. Like, this is as good a time as any to do that. What we like to call is, we're hitting the reset button, right? So one of the first things that we talk about is, are there any inefficiencies in our current setup? Right?
Carl, real quick, just to put a bow on the AOTC, couple questions. So the cap for married joint is 180. Everyone else head of household, widowed, whatever, is 90,000, right? So Marilyn asked, what's the max AGI for in divorce? Everyone else is 90, right? So head of household or whatever. And then the other thing is, for that $4,000, check that $4,000 box. Most families, kind of the easiest, simplest way to make sure you do that is you take the $5,500 student loan, right? you take that $5,500, that student loan is in the kid's name, and we'll get into the details of that. And then, you know, you can pay the rest of your 529, you satisfy your requirements, you're good to go. Right. So that's that on the AOTC.
Yep. Thank you. Yep. So again, this is a time to make sure, like, hey, are we as efficient as we possibly can be from a tax standpoint, right? Like something we say a lot at CFS is like, listen, we don't do everything. We're in this kind of niche world of this college piece, but we want to make sure that everybody's as efficient as they can be. So oftentimes clients will come to us and be like, hey, we don't know if we're in as good a shape as we can be from a taxes standpoint. Do you know any great CPAs? Do you have any on staff? And we do, right? So people that want another opinion when it comes to things like this, you know, taxes, insurance, all this stuff that we all have, these fixed expenses each year and monthly, whatever, come to us and we will give you some options that we feel comfortable recommending. Okay. But again, now is the time that, you know, each of us, and I'm no different, have these inefficiencies where we're paying too much for these types of things, that it's always good to reassess and say, hey, can I be doing better here? Right. And as it pertains to this college conversation, it all goes back to every $100 I can do a month is $5,000 less than I have to borrow, right? Or my kid has to borrow. That's kind of the mindset here, and why $100 becomes more powerful pretty quickly, right? Now, again, we're not, you know, we're not changing anybody's life here, but this is the time to say, do I pay, you know, too much for my phone? Do I pay too much for cable, right? Like, I set my alarm where every year and a half thereabouts, I'll call cable, I'll threaten to leave, and my bill goes down, right? And it's actually, that's kind of coming up here, right? These types of things where, especially in that world, is pretty competitive. Now, we will work with plenty of families that say, listen, we have $0 a monthly cash flow to put towards college with our kid going off next year. We have to borrow every penny. Most of the time, I will push back on that, because I'll say, okay, well, how much does it cost to have this kid under the roof, right? And in most families, as parents, we're paying something for clubs, for dance lessons, for, you know, spending money, right? They're not free to feed, right? On average, colleges calculate that each student does about $250 a month in food, right? And you know, I'm sure a lot of you are saying, I wish my kid only cost $250 a month to feed. But the point is that there are an expense for most of you right now under the roof. They're not going to be under the roof next year. Calculate what that number is and put it towards a payment plan next year, right? That's important. And again, every $100, $5,000 less that we have to borrow. Okay. So now's the time to do that homework. So those are, you know, a lot of hopefully kind of thought-provoking things that we really encourage you to get, do some inventory now before this big bill comes, to see, before we get to this part, how much do we have to borrow, right? And that's what we're going to dig into right now. Now, unfortunately for us, unfortunately for you guys, there is no general rule when it comes to borrowing. There is no one size fits all. This is the best solution for everybody. The best solution for you is going to be dictated by your criteria, right? What's your criteria? My guess is you have no idea. Okay. So my hope is about a half hour, 40 minutes from now, you're going to have a pretty good idea of what criteria is most important for you and your family. And that is going to lead us to the solution that makes the most sense for you and your family. Okay. Another thing that I want to kind of make clear here is that we don't have CFS does not have a formal affiliation with any lender, institutions, etc. So when we talk about the pros and cons of all these different ways that you can borrow, there are no kickbacks that come to us. There are new revenue sharing agreements, things like this. So hopefully a lot of our competitors cannot say that. And I'm not saying we won't be bought one day. Or we won't, have arrangements like that one day, which we will disclose at this point. But to date, that is not the case. So if I were sitting on your side of the table, I would want to hear that. So that's kind of why we go out of our way to share that. Okay. So here's where, you know what, this is maybe the only universal rule we have around borrowing. And we recommend that every single family that goes through this process, even if you don't quote unquote need to borrow, which we'll talk about here, every single family takes advantage of the federal government student loan that you're all entitled to because you completed a FAFSA, right? Or we completed a FAFSA for you. And for this freshman year, it's $5,500, right? You'll be able to utilize up to $6,500 next year, cap out at $7,500 for junior and senior year. So the student's borrowing 27 grand over 4 years. If your student graduates with $27,000 in federal government student loans, you've hit a grand slam as a family. Absolute grand slam. I don't care where they went to school. I don't care what degree they're getting. This is a very fair investment for an undergraduate degree here in 2021. Okay. A couple things to talk about here. Some of you may have remembered or noticed on your award letters, some of your part of this $5,500 may have been identified as subsidized and a part unsubsidized, right? Or kind of vice versa there, right? The big difference here, and of course the language is just not intuitive, right? But the subsidized portion does not accrue interest during college. So for 4.5 years, the federal government is picking up the interest on that. The unsubsidized portion does. So the meter starts running on that interest as soon as the money is dispersed each semester. Okay. This is just in the student's name. They don't need a cosigner. They don't need established credit. They're not going to get a bill until 6 months after graduation. Okay. The rates did go up this year, but they're still very, very competitive. Okay. Especially in this kind of educational loan space. And we can consolidate this after graduation. We can defer it further if we go off to grad school, or we're under or unemployed after graduation. The federal government is by far the most flexible in terms of potential lending partners here. The other thing to keep in mind, and I'm talking specifically to families that maybe don't need to borrow or are opposed to borrowing through the student's name, there's no prepayment penalties. And if we do this, we establish credit for the student, right? So even if I didn't need to borrow, knowing this, I would still have the student take out this money. I'd pay it off instantaneously. That way they graduate with established credit. I didn't pay any interest fees or anything else. It's just a smart strategy if we have the means to do that. Okay.
Yeah, the other thing, Carl, I don't know if it was there. That's use it or lose it, right? So if you don't take that $5,500 freshman year, you can't go back sophomore year and take the 65 and the 55, right? 55, if you don't use it freshman year, it's gone essentially, right? So just be aware of that as well.
I'm glad you said that too, because it reminds me, and we should have there should be more emphasis brought to this point that I'm about to say here. And that is the fact that, we have plenty of families that nobody wants to borrow, right? And maybe even some that are like kind of on the edge of should they not. If something changes in subsequent years and you try to get more money out of a college, something unforeseen happens, you have kind of fluctuating income. If you don't take advantage of this borrowing program,
good point. Yep. That
will negatively impact your ability to ask for more money in subsequent years. And we have many use cases of this. We probably see it every year when we say, hey, we lost a job. We need more money. Well, what'd you do last year? Oh, you felt you were in such a good position. You didn't take advantage of the federal government student loan that was a part of your financial aid package. That will hurt your odds. So it's also a nice kind of borderline insurance in case anything happens in the future that's not great. You're maximizing your odds of the college working with you. So long story short, I don't care what your situation is. You really have to talk me out of why you shouldn't take advantage of this program. Okay.
The other thing is too, right? So from a strategy perspective, and I was having this conversation the other day. So the rate's like 3.75, right? Maybe you say I have 5.29 money. And listen, this goes to your risk tolerance, but maybe your 529 is making 7, 8, 9% returns, right? So you're making 6% by using that $5,500, right? So to that end, and then if any of it's subsidized where it's interest free, well, then it becomes an absolute no brainer, right? So there's for the most part, very very few exceptions where that $5,500 you're not going to utilize that.
Yep. Good point. Now, in order to actually execute this loan, I'm not going to spend much time on this because along with the recording and the slides, we do a step-by-step kind of tutorial of exactly what each student needs to do in order for this money to change hands between the federal government and the college. So that will be part of the follow-up where we almost kind of have a Cliff Notes cheat code version of how to complete this. These steps in very, very short order. So I'm not going to belabor that tonight, but again, you can kind of look forward to that in the follow-up, and take my word for it, it's going to make that part of the process very efficient. Okay.
Let me, Carl, one more thing on the $5,500 because I saw this a few times, right? So, and David, this is going to you, or I'm sorry, David, this is going to your question. So the $5,500, for whatever reason, sometimes it's not on the financial aid award, right? Or sometimes the school will only put the $3,500 of the subsidized, right? And so the other 2,000 won't be there. Why they do that, I can't answer it. But
I can, but go ahead.
Yeah, all right. So as long as you submit a FAFSA, right, whether it's on the financial aid award or not, you're entitled to the $5,500, right? Your income's irrelevant. You get $5,500. Now your income or your EFC really will determine if that 55 is going to be subsidized, but you get $5,500, right? So no matter what, so you're entitled to it. The school can't say no, you're not getting it, right? It's guaranteed by the federal government, right? And then the school within the EFC will determine if it's subsidized or not. So if you didn't see it subsidized, well, then you're not going to get it subsidized. But at the very least, you are entitled to that $5,500, whether it's on the financial aid award or not.
Yeah, so it's a great point, and I'm glad it came up. And the reason why a lot of these schools, they like to advertise we're a quote unquote no loan school, and they really like the statistics about how kids don't even have to borrow anything to go to their school. But the fact of the matter is, some families still need to borrow money to go to that college, right? But it's not even offered in their financial aid package, or only some of it's offered because, again, that helps kind of their statistics, but they actually need that $5,500. And we work on plenty of families like that every year of like, okay, Bates, you're a no loan school, but I need my kid to borrow the full $5,500, right? And I didn't even know that option existed. So that's where, again, to Vern's point, you got to reach out to the financial aid office and say, hey, we want to take advantage of the full $5,500. Okay. Now, another question that we got an awful lot over the years is, well, what's a reasonable amount for my kid to borrow over the course of 4 years? Like I said, if they only do the $27,000 over the course of 4 years, grand slam. But unfortunately, that's not the reality for everybody. There's plenty of families that the student, and or the parent, they need to borrow more than that. And what's a decent metric to use to say, well, how much is too much, right? And here's kind of something that we landed on a few years ago, which it took us a few years to land on, has proven to be really effective, is that to the extent that we can, and we know that, again, this is not the reality for everybody, we don't want to borrow more than our average or expected starting salary after graduation, based on our discipline, right, in a given school. So if we're an engineering major, we might say, hey, this kid can borrow up to 60 grand over the course of 4 years and, be very much in the clear. But if it's an education major, it's our expected salary after graduation, kind of our ceiling over the course of our career is different, right? So we want to be cognizant of that. And the reason is because this is kind of where the math, when we start to borrow as an engineering major too much more above $60,000, our first minimum monthly payment versus our take-home pay with this salary, we start to, the numbers start to not work, right? But again, if we're below or close to this, we're going to be pretty good in terms of, okay, my take home pay and my monthly payments are still allowing me enough of a delta to live independently and have a life here, right? I don't have to go home and live with my parents because because again, I borrowed too much and I can afford it, right? And now again, can everybody get there? No, but this is a metric that we found to be pretty stinking helpful. Okay, so after the federal direct student loan program, what are our options? And from a high level, there's three kind of major buckets when it comes to educational loans, right? That's the federal program, the state programs, and as we'll talk about, not every state has a program, and then the private sector, which for most people is kind of the most common, the Sallie Mae and SoFi's and Citizens loans of the world. So I want to talk about each of those right now. Now, the PLUS loan is the federal government program for parents. Okay, so the problem with that student federal government program is the caps, right? The most we can borrow is 27 grand over the course of 4 years. Okay, so once we go above that threshold, if we want to use the federal government, we are using what's called the PLUS loan. One of the biggest caveats that we have to know immediately out of the gates is this loan is only in the parent's name. Okay, it is not attached to the student in any capacity outside of a handshake agreement, right? So for example, if a family wants to use a PLUS loan, but they think actually the student should be eligible or should be the one that's in charge of repaying this loan, or the onus is on them, you can do that, but it's a handshake agreement, right? If the student after graduation defaults on that loan, it's not going to come back on them in any capacity. It's only on the parent's name that is that took this loan out. Okay, the PLUS loan in terms of the application itself is super easy, and you find out instantaneously if you've been approved or denied. And it's also, as we'll talk about in a second here, the most lenient in terms of qualification. So if you're a family that has bad credit and not a strong application, and maybe income is low, you probably the PLUS loan is probably your best bet in terms of actually being approved. Okay, again, just like all the loans or most of them, interest rates went up this year. They went up about a point. They were down about a point lower last year. The origination fee is pretty stinking high on the PLUS loan. That's why we put it in the con section here. Okay, sorry about that. But there's certainly some pros here as well, right? I mean, one of them is, again, that we can defer payments. We don't have to make any payments until 6 months after graduation. And there's no penalty there, quote unquote, no penalty there, outside of the interest will be accruing, right? There's no portion of this that is subsidized. The interest will be accruing starting day one, or when the money's dispersed at least, but we don't have to make any payments until 6 months after graduation, but there's no prepayment penalties, right? So it's one of these deals where we can chip away at it as it's feasible during the college years without any actual obligation or regular payment. So especially for families that are hurting right now, but have a reasonable expectation that it's going to be different 4.5 years from now, or families that have fluctuating incomes, this flexibility can be pretty important, right? They're also the most flexible when it comes to repayment. Okay, you can change your repayment plan at any time, an unlimited number of times. We can stretch this out 30 years if we want to, right? Of course, that means we're getting smoked from an interest standpoint, but from a cash flow standpoint, we can get pretty creative. We can also consolidate these loans after graduation. We can also consolidate them among multiple children. Okay. The PLUS program also has a fairly robust forgiveness program, right? Now, the negative press is not without, I think a lot of the negative press is justified in that it's, even though a lot of families should be, kind of covered for these forgiveness programs, if they don't do everything right clerically, if they're not perfect, they're kind of missing out on this and missing the boat. And that's something that's getting some much deserved attention here. But in general, if we are a parent that is anywhere in the civil service industry, we're going to be eligible for the forgiveness program, right? So if we have a parent that is a police officer, that's a fireman, is a teacher, is a nurse, these are all things that would qualify for the forgiveness program, which is pretty good. The long and the short of it is you got to make 10 years of repayments, but after that, the balance is forgiven. That's kind of the long and short of the forgiveness program. There's also some, without getting too cute here, sometimes there's some workarounds and strategies that, for example, if there's one parent that has a very low income, you can take out the plus loan, still qualify, do an income-based repayment plan, and your payment might be $0. And if you quote unquote make that payment for 30 years, it'll be forgiven after that. Right. So there is this world, and we have, decent amount of families that are in this where their payment is actually $0 because they're on the income-based repayment plan. And once those years pass, the balance will be forgiven. Okay. Now they will get a major tax bomb in that year, but they're still going to end up winning, essentially. Another one is, and this is a morbid, this is a bit morbid, but I'd be remiss not to share it. The plus loan is a little bit unique compared to other options in the sense that if the parent that is taking out the plus loan passes away, the loan essentially dies with them. Everything is forgiven. There is nothing, that debt is not, taken on by the student or the spouse or anything like that. So we have had scenarios where, if there's a much older parent, sometimes this made sense to explore. We've had sad cases where there was a terminally or an ill parent where this type of thing made sense, and it was kind of a silver lining of another otherwise tragic situation. So I don't need to be terribly morbid, but I also want to make sure that you all have all the facts here. Okay.
Yeah, hey, just FYI on that. So when you actually go to apply to the federal parent plus loan, right, you're going to use the parent FSA ID. So if you want the loan to be in one parent's name and not the other, you might have to create a new FSA ID for that parent, right? So whoever fills out the loan with their FSA ID linked to their social, that's whose name it's going to be in. If you want it to be in a different parent's name, that's fine. You certainly can do that. But you will have to create an FSA ID. Also, again, I'll mention divorce separated, right? Both parents can take loans, right? So the non-custodial will have to create their own FSA ID. That will need to happen as well. But both biological parents and I believe step parents also, if wanted, are allowed to take the parent plus loan. But and especially so, honestly, my father passed away 3 years ago. It actually happened with my brother, where his federal loan got, certainly wasn't planned, obviously, and he was in his late 20s, but his loan got forgiven. So the point I'm trying to make here, if you do have an older parent, make sure you use their FSA ID to take the loan. Or if you have one parent makes a lot more money than the other parent, you want to go with the lower income parent. Even though you're married, you could still put the one parent's income and then do income-driven repayments, right? And so your income-driven repayments in subsequent years will be much lower and basically play out the string for 30 years. Or, unfortunately, until, that person passed. So the key being, whoever FSA ID you use, that's whose name the parent plus loan is going to be in. So just a point of emphasis there.
Yeah, great point, right? Okay, the next kind of option here is state programs. Now, not every state has a program. Okay, the reason why we spent a little bit more time on it is because many of you are from the Northeast here, right? And we have a program, pretty good one in Massachusetts. We have a pretty good one in New Jersey. We do not have one in New York. And you can take advantage of your state's program if you are a resident of the state or your kid goes to school in that state, right? So even if, so for example, if I'm a New York resident, my state doesn't have a program, but my kid goes to school at Rutgers in New Jersey. Well, I can now use New Jersey's program and take out an NJ class loan. Okay. Another important thing to consider here is that Rhode Island is the only state that's an exception, in that anybody can borrow through the Rhode Island state program, and they have a pretty competitive one. So you don't have to be a Rhode Island resident. Your kid doesn't have to go to school there. You are still allowed to borrow through the state of Rhode Island's program. And we're going to have, as part of the follow-up part of the slide deck here, you're going to have links to each of these states' programs. And again, Rhode Island included, in case you're one of these families that are in New York or any other state that does not have a program and your kid's not going to school in a state that does. Okay.
I'm going to throw some the NJ class and the Rhode Island loans in the chat so you guys can have them, but we will follow up with an email, with more specifics.
Yep. Great. Thanks. And one of the big difference out of the gates is the fact that these students and the parents are formally attached to this loan. So oftentimes the terminology that they use is that they are co-borrowers. So this is one of these deals that if you're a parent where it's important that your kid has formal skin in the game, this is going to check that box for you. This year, most of the state programs have more competitive rates than the federal plus loan. Okay. And last year we were spending some time internally as a team going through this, and one of the big things that stuck out to us is that last year the federal rates were so stinking competitive that they blew away most of the state rates, and especially with their more flexible repayment plans. We're pretty sure that the state programs took a bath last year. They did not do well at all. Probably one of their worst years. So this year they came out guns a-blazing. And as consumers, we can benefit a little bit from that, because the rates from a state standpoint are pretty stinking good this year, and almost across the board better than the federal government. So that's where, if we're a family that says, hey, I want my kid formally attached to this loan, that's an important piece for me. And of course I want a better rate. Then we might have to take a pretty close look at some of these state programs, even if we lose some things like we'll talk about here. Maybe we lose some of the flexibility and repayment plans that the federal government has, right? So when we look at cons here, we don't have some of that same flexibility. Sometimes we can't always consolidate, right? And sometimes the credit requirements are a little bit harder. So, unfortunately, there is no, you hear like, okay, great, my kid's on it, that's awesome, lower rate, this is a no-brainer. But again, there's always a kind of a price to pay somewhere. And in this case, these are some of the downsides of the state programs in general, right? And each of the state has a different program. That's important to mention too. And again, I know Vern just put some links in there, and we'll have the specifics in your follow-up here. But they are a little bit different in terms of their rates and their repayment terms, et cetera. I know we're coming up on an hour here. We're going to go a little bit longer tonight. I don't want to I know we work very, very hard not to give presentations more than an hour, because if you're anything like us, that's about the maximum attention span, but there's just too much important conversation. So I know we're going to go a bit over tonight, and I don't want to rush it because it's important stuff. So I'm just giving that heads up. And of course, like we said at the top, if you want to cut out, you're going to get a recording of the whole thing anyway. So just giving that heads up.
Hey, just real quick and point of emphasis here. So for all of these loans, so you're borrowing yearly, right? All of these are year to year. You're not going to, you don't borrow for all 4 years. We're just looking in 1 year chunks. As you can see, every year the rates change, et cetera. So, question, what if you move, things of that nature? You're borrowing in 1 year increments, right? So important to understand that.
Yeah, and I just saw it. I don't want to steal your thunder here. I'm sure you would have hit this, Vern, but one of the questions is the NJ class loan or any state loan, is it the same where if the parent passes, the loan's forgiven? And the answer is no, because both the student and the parents are equally and formally responsible for these loans.
Yeah, the
Okay.
student's the co-signer on the state loans. That's one of the major differences between the federal and state.
That's right. And usually another kind of difference here is that the rate of the loan does not change if you defer payment for the plus loan, right? So if I say, hey, I'm going to take the plus loan and I'm not going to make a payment till 6 months after graduation, that's not going to change your rate, whether you start paying aggressively right away or 6 months after graduation. For the state programs, it will. The more aggressive your repayment plan, the more competitive your rate, the more flexibility you want in terms of pushing off when you actually have to pay that loan, the more you're going to pay for that flexibility. Okay. So those are the big components from the state standpoint. Private student loans, more similar to the state in the sense that both the parent and the student are going to be formally attached here, but this one in some ways the opposite end of the spectrum from the Parent Plus loan, in that the student is primarily responsible for the loan. The parent is there as a safety net, as a co-signer, right? And generally speaking, anyone can co-sign on these loans. It doesn't have to be necessarily the parent. It can be anybody that has established credit. Okay. It's a crowded space, right? There's a ton of lenders that families can use here, which can be, kind of information overload here. And again, this is the Sally Mays and the Citizens and the SoFis of the world. Approval, is usually granted 1 day to 5 days at a minimum. Some of them are quicker. Some of them are closer to that instantaneous. One of the big kind of annoying parts about private student loans is that unlike the state, unlike the plus loan, we have to actually complete an application to see what rate and repayment terms we get, right? And the range is freaking huge. If we have a perfect application, very high net worth, perfect credit score, very high income, we can get a very competitive rate. And this is incredibly rare, right? Where we get it maybe even lower than the state rates. If we're barely getting approved for the loan based on the application of the cosigner, it could be as high as 15%, right? These banks are essentially saying, how big is my risk? And the riskier the borrower, the more premium that we're going to need to take on that risk, right? Oftentimes these have variable rates, so we want to be super careful that when we're selecting these, often front and center, it'll look like a pretty stinking competitive rate, but in the fine print, we find out it's a variable rate that's changing quarterly, that might be capped at a pretty high number. So we got to be super aware of what our actual rate is. Okay. And you can't necessarily always consolidate these loans, again, similar to the state and a little bit different than the federal government. There tend to be a little bit less transparency, for lack of a better word, in our estimation. And again, I'm generalizing here, which is not fair, but this kind of, we find that private student lenders don't tend to be as front and center with making consumers aware of what they're signing up for. And again, that's generalizing, but we just kind of have emphasis of, you have to read the fine print here, the devil's in the details, that whole deal. Okay. There are, different than the federal government, different than oftentimes state loans. You usually have the option to defer payment at no additional cost. Oftentimes there are no origination fees, right? So there are origination fees, certainly for the federal government, usually for the state programs. There's a decent amount of private loans where we don't have origination fees. And we also have, again, oftentimes cosigner release programs. So usually who it makes sense for, and we'll reiterate this in a minute here, but for parents that, or for families that say, hey, listen, it's very important that the student is primarily responsible for this loan, right? If we had it our way, we wouldn't be on there in any capacity. We realize they need a cosigner. So we're willing to do that. But as soon as we can come off this thing, we want to do that. then we would have to look really closely at private student loans. Okay. Massachusetts program actually has, our state program has a cosigner release program, but they're the exception as opposed to the rule. Usually we can just find that in the private sector. Another reason where we'd want to look at the private sector if we know we have a cosigner with superior credit, and who's going to have a very robust application, then maybe we get a pretty competitive rate, pretty good repayment terms, that might be the federal government, might be the state. Let's take a look at the private sector if we're checking those boxes.
Real quick. So here's what I advise a lot of my clients, and it kind of takes some planning in that sense, right? So say, you really do want, the loan to be in the kid's name, but, the private loan or for whatever reason, the state loan, you want to go with the federal loan. Here's the play there, right? So basically you got to think kind of long term. So you take the federal loan and it's in your name as a parent, right? But what you want to start to do is start building credit for your kid, right? Get them a secured credit card, take that $5,500, the student loans, so start building credit, monitor their credit, Credit Karma, get them on one of those websites. Hopefully by this time next year, Matt will have us an affiliate link. So when we recommend that, we get no, but listen, start having them build credit, right? And so here's the play there. You have the Parent Plus loan. Once they graduate in 4 years, they get a job. They now have income, right? Because while the federal and the state are credit based, right? They don't look at your income when they're assessing you. The private loans are going to take into account income, right? So once your son or daughter has a job, they're graduated from college, they're making, they're earning a living, and they have a strong credit score now. You want to go back and look to refi those loans privately, right? So you're going to take the federal student loan and refi it privately. A lot of the times, you could put it singularly in their name, right? The only way to get the federal is, like we talked about, get rid of the federal is to die, like we talked about right now. But you could refi out of it, right, into a private, like SoFi, different websites like that. So you get it out of your name as a parent, it goes to the kid's name, but also, right, so we talked about, it's 6 and 7% as far as the rates on the federal parent loan. Once the kid graduates, has a job, the reason that the rates are so high initially, they're unsecured loans, right? I put this in the chat, but if you don't pay your mortgage, the bank takes your house, right? You don't pay your car loan, they repo your car. You don't pay your student loan, they're not taking the kid's brain, right? So it's essentially unsecured. Once the kid graduates, has a job, right? It becomes a lot less risk, and so you get a much more competitive rate, right? So that's kind of 4 or 5 year planning down the road, where you want to say, okay, I really don't want this, hanging over my head as I'm approaching or into retirement as a parent, so it's in your name for the first 4 or 5 years. And, and then, make sure you're having a good credit score, because the credit score will be, when you go to refi the loan privately, the credit score will have a major impact on what kind of rate that you get, right? And, it's good to have a strong credit score no matter what. So that's something that you kind of keep in mind, kind of long-term planning, where you go, SoFi is a good website for that, kind of a starting point. NerdWallet is actually a pretty good website where they give you a breakdown of some of the pros and cons of some of those private things. But the problem is, as going before you graduate, the risk is high. So you're paying a premium for that risk as an unsecured loan in those private loans. But, 4 or 5 years, the risk significantly decreases. And, you could eventually get those loans out of your name as a parent. So, food for thought and kind of long-term planning there.
No, great call. So let's talk a little bit about, our quote unquote alternative options there, right? So those are the big kind of major 3 players in terms of our traditional educational loans: the federal government, our state options, and then the private sector, right? But there's a few other things that are at the very least, at least in some cases, worth investigating here, right?
Just
So
real quick, let me just answer this one and then go with the alternative option. So the Parent Plus loan, the question is, do you borrow half of the amount that you need for each year in the semester, or do you borrow all at the beginning of the year, right? So you're borrowing in 1 year increments. So let's say that you need $20,000 for freshman year, right, to borrow from the Parent Plus loan. You're going to apply and borrow $20,000, right? And what they're going to do, so the federal government has like 89 companies they sub out that services the loan. Who's ever going to service your loan, they're going to send $10,000 to pay, to cover that fall semester bill, right? So they're going to split it. So if you need 20 for the year, they'll send 10 for fall and 10 for spring, right? So you're borrowing in 1 year increments, right? You're not borrowing in 4 year increments. You're not borrowing, in a semester increment. But that being said, I've had parents do this as well. You say, okay, I can cover the first semester, cash 529, whatever. You don't have to apply for the loan yet. Wait till December, right? And then you could apply, and all of that money will just go to the spring semester, right? You could do that as well because you're able to pay the fall bill. But if you need the money for both, you're borrowing in year increments there. Okay, so important concept to understand. All right, alternative options.
Yep, no, you're right, and it is important. So I mean, listen, again, everybody's different in terms of their criteria, what's most important to them. But when we have a family that walks into our office and says, "Hey, I don't care what the downside risk is or the cons. The only thing I care about is getting the lowest rate possible. I have to borrow. I just tell me where I'm getting the lowest rate possible. That's what I'm going to do." I'll say, okay, well, you're a homeowner. Well, if you are, that might be where you're going to get the lowest rate possible, right? And there's two ways we can access our home equity. We can take out an equity line of credit, a HELOC, kind of borrow as I go, right? I can open up a HELOC for 100 grand and only use 25 grand a year and only pay back on the amount that I actually borrow, versus doing a refinance, taking out a big lump sum. Hey, I'm going to need 150 grand for 4 years of college. I'm going to lock in that rate and take out 150 grand and put it somewhere. Pros and cons of each, right? I mean, the lump sum situation, if we're eligible for need-based financial aid, we got to talk about where we're going to put that money. So we're not hurting our chances of getting more financial aid in that subsequent year, right? The HELOCs tend to have that nice flexibility where, hey, we only borrow what we need. I only make repayments on what I need, but I'm in a variable rate as opposed to the fix with the refi, right? And then we have to think about things where obviously this is only in the parent's name. If you're paying your college at costs out of home equity and you want your student to be on the hook for a percentage of that, well, then again, that's going to be a scenario where it's a handshake agreement between you and that student, right? They are not going to be formally attached to that loan. But, that big one all starts with, hey, are we philosophically open to using our home equity to pay college costs, right? And listen, personally, I think, hey, that's real money. It's just in your walls. It's real money. Let's put that on the table as we think about the best ways to finance this thing. But that's my philosophy. That doesn't make it the right one. And you got to think about, what feels right to you guys, right? I mean, we'll say all the time, does it pass kind of the sleep at night test, right? Are we going to be able to sleep at night if we go that route, even though, even if it doesn't make the most economic sense, we got to think about, that's important. That matters. There's an emotional component to this, certainly that we don't want to ignore. Okay. Another one is, what about, for a lot of families we work with, most of their savings or investments are locked up in retirement. Should I use money from retirement accounts? The short answer for most people, I shouldn't even say, I can't think of an exception. The short answer is we firmly recommend against this, right? And again, and this is, and this is something that, having a lot of financial advisors on our staff, they are just vehement about this, of like, do not use retirement money to pay for your students' college expenses, especially if it's via a distribution, right? If we're going to take money out of an IRA or out of a 401k, that's going to hurt us a few different ways. Obviously, we are reducing our retirement savings, but worse than that, we're increasing our taxable income, which is going to decrease the amount of financial aid we're getting in subsequent years. And if we're below 59 and a half, right? If the age of the parent is under 59 and a half, we're taking a penalty on that as well. So it's almost as if we get whacked on 4 different kind of major ways. So that's why we're pretty vehement of do not do this. Now, there are 401k plans that come with very competitive borrowing rates that we can borrow against our 401k at a very competitive rate. So this is not a hill we'll die on in terms of saying don't do this. We certainly don't love it because now that money's not going to work for us in retirement, and worse yet, we're kind of depleting those retirement accounts. But again, it is not with the same kind of devastating effects that take place when we actually distribute money from a 401k or from an IRA. The exception here is a Roth IRA. Roth IRAs almost operate like 529s in that we can use that money for college and it's tax-free. So that is something that if we have 529s, we may or may not be aware that money can be a great vehicle to use for college. Now, of course, we are depleting our college savings, but it is something that we certainly want to look at, and that is oftentimes even our financial gurus will sign off on using the Roths if it's for college. Okay. Now there are some folks that have a life insurance policy that have cash value. The thing we need to be careful about there in terms of in terms of withdrawing from those is that if we take the money out there, oftentimes, according to the college, and there's actually very few exceptions, I should say, always, if not, most of the time, they will see that as an untaxed contribution or distribution rather, which will really hurt your EFC, which could make you eligible for less financial aid if you're a financial aid family or a financial aid candidate. Okay. So we need to be super, super careful there if that's the route we go, where usually if we're a family that was somewhere in that bucket or considering that bucket, we'd say probably makes sense to borrow against your life insurance policy as opposed to the cash out. That way we can avoid losing financial aid in subsequent years. Okay. Now, it's not lost on me that I'm getting pretty granular here, getting pretty in the weeds here. Some of this stuff applies to your family. Some of it does not at all. I just want to make sure that we cover kind of all angles, at least a little bit. Most of you are going to have some more particular questions. Again, that's where you should follow up with us, especially if it's this stuff. We're probably going to say, talk to our planners. This is where this is kind of beyond just this college scope here. And again, when we're trying to thread this needle with retirement and college and taxes, you're going to want to talk to those guys to make sure that you're kind of in the optimal space, which is something that we'll make sure that we follow up on for those of you that are interested in doing that. Okay.
Yep. I had a question I wanted to answer live, and now I forget the question. Let me find it real quick. Is there a deadline for? There's more than one. Is there a deadline for accepting the $5,500? Not really. You can take it in semester, but it's pretty straightforward process. So get it. There's no reason to go past August without that, right? By the time your bill's done, just follow the steps. You basically got to do 3 things, and kind of that's that. Oh, here it is, right? So let me just quickly distinguish between direct costs and indirect costs, right? So direct costs, and I appreciate the question. Direct costs are what you're going to receive a bill for. Room, board, tuition, and fees, right? You're actually going to receive a bill for. But when you look at the cost of the school, you're also going to see on there what they consider indirect costs: books, transportation, incidentals, things like that, right? Which obviously you're not going to get a bill for, okay? So the question is, can we borrow for the indirect costs? And the answer is yes. So you can borrow the total. So the school sets, at their school, they say whatever it is, $3,000, $4,000 a year. Yes, you can borrow that. And how you will actually get that indirect cost money is in the form of what they call a refund check, right? So if you borrow those indirect costs, you'll get a refund check. When you go to fill out the loan application, they'll actually ask you, do you want the refund check to go to the student or the parent? Obviously, you can make that decision. But yes, one, distinguish between direct costs, which is room, board, tuition, fees, what you will receive a bill for, and then indirect costs, books, transportation, things of that nature, which you won't receive a bill for, but schools still factor into the cost of their school, and you are able, to borrow for that. Okay. So important concept, direct versus indirect. Good question. Thanks for the question.
Yep, great point. Okay, so kind of our punchlines here, right? We're coming down to the wire here. So what is your family's best solution, right? So okay, I understand about the three major buckets here. I know I got to take out the federal government student loan. I know when to use which savings. I know what I got to do with in terms of my homework and taking inventories to maximize cash flow, because it's drilled in my head that every $100 equals $5,000 less that I have to borrow. But what is my solution for that money that I do in fact have to borrow, right? For my family. And again, what is my criteria? And everybody's different. So this is the stuff we have to look at here, right? How much does the rate of the loan matter? Of course it matters, but we have to start to quantify that, right? Like, do we really value, do we care about whose name is on this loan, right? Like, does the kid's name have to be on it? Is that important to us? If it does, and it does formally, well, the plus loan is out the window. We can't use that. Okay. Does it, what about if it's informally? Well, then it's still in play. Do I want to make sure that I'm off this loan as soon as possible? Well, guess what? We might have to look within the private sector. Okay. Excuse me, how much do I value consumer protection, right? This flexibility that the federal government has, excuse me, more so than anybody else, right? That we almost like to call insurance. Yes, maybe they have a higher rate than the state, but I love this idea. If I lose a job, they're going to work with me. I love the idea of extending out payments. I want that safety net again, or I don't care. I just want that lower rate. So give me the state plan, right? And again, do I have accessible home equity? Am I willing to access it? Is that even on the table here, right? Let's answer some of these questions, because basically we answer these questions and we are going to back into our answers, right? Based on what we've learned tonight. Again, and a lot of times it's dictated who needs to be on the loan, how much do we value the rate versus the flexibility of the repayment. Let's kind of land on what makes the most sense for our family. And of course, like we talked about, we're not going anywhere, right? I mean, you're working with us to help kind of get you to the finish line here. Hopefully this sets a great foundation. And again, you're going to get the recording, you're going to get all the Q&A and the transcription, you're going to get the links to all these state programs, the links to some of the calculators. So we can help you, make sure that you're super confident that, hey, yes, we have to pay this big bill that's a lot to swallow, but we are doing it the right way. So we're going to get you there. We're going to get you all the way to the finish line. And and again, we are not going anywhere here. And for those of you that have the more complex questions and want to look further, down the road than just this first year to say how, what's going to go on with my retirement? Am I handling that piece right as it pertains to this? You can talk to one of our comprehensive financial planners, and they can answer those questions that are a little beyond Vern and I's job description here. So hopefully that helped you out tonight. Now again, do your homework. This is the time to hit that reset button. Are we as efficient as we can be with these big expenses and small expenses in our life, right? If we want to do a monthly payment plan with colleges, now's the time to at least investigate. And we can expect the bill a little bit from most colleges. Again, you're responsible to figure out when your college bill is issued and due, but most schools it's around mid-July, due around mid-August, and we want to have this plan in place by about a month from now. And again, we're going to help you get there. So you'll have all this stuff, the repayment calculators and things like this that you can play with on your own, in addition to the kind of that one-on-one guidance that we will provide, and that'll be part of the deliverables as we follow up here, in addition to the state programs here. And again, a reminder that Rhode Island is the one that we all have access to. So hopefully that was helpful for you all. I know it's a lot in a short period of time, but and we always try to get an hour, but I can't with this and I don't want to shortchange it because it's important, right? These are big bills and you want to get this right. And it is a big difference. There is a right and a wrong here usually. So we want to get this right and we want to help you get it right. So hopefully we provided some value here. Again, we're not going anywhere. So any follow-up questions, we will be here right up until we get your the kids moved into the dorm here. So that's it for now. That's all we have. Again, you'll get the follow-up from us as always. And appreciate the kind words here for those of you offering those. Verno, thanks a lot for being the co-pilot here. And it sounds like it looks like you answered a ton of questions for folks. So I appreciate you all, and we'll be in touch shortly.
Have a good night.
All right, bye guys.